Happy Sweet 16. This is the 16th iteration of this godforsaken audio production. Thank you for joining. Version 16 of Breaking Change. I'm going to title it provocatively, No Politics Allowed. The contents of this podcast are apolitical. Come at me. Well, I'll explain later. Before you get mad, actually, if you're mad, just stop listening and email me now. And then once you got it off your chest, then you can keep listening. The best kind of emails that a podcast can receive are those that are sent in haste and in a furious passion while the person is still listening to the podcast. And then they have a self-reply 2 hours later being like, oh yeah, I finished the podcast and it turns out I agree with you. So I don't know if I've mentioned this publicly before, but I had developed a policy on GitHub a few years ago. That when somebody opens an issue or a pull request or complains about anything that I've done in open source, they're using a tool, they can't figure it out, they claim that there's a bug, I just snooze it for a day. I'll throw it in my to-do tracker. I use things, and then I'll schedule it out for a day or two. And within 24 hours, the vast majority of people will just resolve their own issue. And usually that resolution would never have needed to involve me anyway. So maybe that's something to try in your own life. When people ask you for help, just ignore them and let them pick themselves up by their own bootstraps. I don't know how generally applicable, come to think of it, that bit of advice is, but if you've made something before and other people have said that it was broken and then it turned out that they were just using it wrong, you have a couple options, right? You can try to not harbor resentment while you kindly ask leading questions that may indicate whether they're doing it wrong, right? Because you don't want to just reply to somebody you've never met and been like, well, you're using it wrong. I mean, you could. Maybe I should. But the truth is you don't know. And the thing is that in their world, they have you had a tremendous information disadvantage, especially if it's like a computer or something. It's like, well, I am looking at this, and here's what my terminal says, and fuck, they could forge it if they wanted to prove a point. So it's not like you're gonna win an argument with somebody about what they're experiencing. And people get defensive, and they don't, if they're there to complain, especially if they want customer service for that open source code that they paid so much for. So instead, I've come to just snooze it for a day or two, let people self-soothe, and it has the added benefit, of course, that if somebody really was in the heat of passion and frustration and anger when they wrote the thing, if I give it a day, they'll have simmered down and probably moved on to a new target and be a little bit less riled up. So that's some advice. Let's get into what's new in life. A lot of stuff. None of it matters. That's what you're here for, right? I just got back inside from attaching a new heavy-duty 2-inch pool drain hose onto the when you search for arcane products that come with that are parts of like specialty pieces of luxury home life, right? The fact that we have a pool is an incredible luxury, but it requires you as the homeowner to either outsource everything about that, including, and no matter who you outsource it to, like, they'll never get everything right, and the response time will never be perfect. So if you're the kind of person listening to this podcast or following my work, you probably have too strong of a sense of taste, too little patience for things being broken or wrong, and too fine an attention to detail to, you know, such that you'll catch little things that any service provider, no matter how great your pool guy is, are going to miss. So this leads you to figure out how to, you know, solve problems on your own. And the product that I bought, because I needed, occasionally this may make no sense, but because it makes sense when somebody explains it, I suppose. When you own a swimming pool and it rains a lot, it's a closed loop system. There's water in the pool. There is pipes and technology that connect under the ground to a pump, which will pump that water through either the skimmer basket or the main drain or both, usually both, through a filter, you know, such that any detritus gets caught in the filter, all the little, like, you know, gnats and tiny bits of dirt and shit goes through the filter, and it requires usually an electric pump going at some RPM to pull that through. So if it rains, you know, when water goes back in afterwards, I should say, it's the same water recirculating. So when it rains, the pool just gets more full, and that's not bad on, you know, if you get your pool to the point of surface tension, it looks kind of cool. It's like, you know, it's shimmery. You know, you could, you know, float a cork on it. You ever done that? I had a science experiment once. Shit. I'll get back to the pool stuff because I know it's fascinating you. In 8th grade, I had a science teacher who we did an elective, and it was all just labs. It was all those little, like, middle school science experiments, but with none of the learning the science part, just the activities. And I didn't love it. The guy was he was really attracted to my classmate Natalie. That is something I've never unpacked, because the last time I was concerned about that, I myself was 12 years old. Fuck. Shit. Well, anyway, one of his experiments, it was a challenge. It said, okay, you got a glass of water, and you need to float a cork in the glass, and it's got to be stable, like not moving around, such that it never hits the sides of the glass. And we had, you know, 18 pairs of people all working on this problem for an hour. And there's only so many variables that you can tweak when all you have is a glass, a faucet of water, and a cork. And we were all, you know, because this guy was a bit eccentric. We really felt like 10 of us middle schoolers in combination were probably smarter than him. So within 20, 30 minutes, we're all like, oh yeah, Mr. Blows and Fucks is just pulling our leg or is an idiot, and this is impossible. Because that's the kind of arrogance, I guess, in aggregation we were able to muster, because the guy was such a dweeb. So at the very end, he finally shows us the solution, and it was, he filled up the glass to the point of surface tension. So there's like a little bubble arcing over at the top of the glass where you can keep adding a little bit of water, and the surface tension, you know, effect is strong enough that it won't break, it won't spill over the edge. And when it's in that state and you place the cork on top at that moment, right in the center, it's the surface tension holding it, I guess, and it'll just stay stable. It won't move left and right. And that is the surface tension pro tip of the day. Yeah, not a lot of podcasts can get you that kind of surface tension talk. So moving back to the pool, when it rains, it gets really full. This, again, surface tension being cool and all, right? That would not be a problem, except for the fact that if you've ever seen a pool skimmer, and that's the flappy do right along the top rim, it's a little box, and you've probably seen, like, when the pump is running, it's sucking water, and you can see that the water is pushing down like a little door, right? And it's I'm talking like mail slot size, like 7 inches across, maybe 3-4 inches tall, 5 inches tall. What that's doing is it's skimming the pool. So as long as the water's surface line is any of those 5 inches and that door is opening, the shit's surfing on top of that water like dead bugs will go along for the ride as that door opens and then get sucked down via suction via the pump through the filter, and then they'll get caught in the filter. If the water level is too high, the door will be lower, like the top of the door will be of the skimmer will be lower than the surface of the water. And then pretty soon, instead of a cork floating in surface tension, you just have a pool full of fucking disgusting bugs. So I went through like 3 pool guys who couldn't even explain to me what was happening. All I knew was I was paying $120 a month to have a bunch of bugs in my pool, to the point where I was like trying to like buy random devices on Amazon to try to solve this problem for me, or going around and skimming it manually every day, before I realized, my problem is the pool has too much water in it. So I took to draining the pool and filling the pool to kind of, get the right water level. Not that hard. To do that, I'll spare you, because this is not entirely meant to be a pool related podcast. It's not a pool podcast. But when I drained the pool, I only had like a 10-foot hose. It was whatever the owners left behind. It's a rubber hose. It's 2 inch in diameter. It was cinched with a steel collar. And when I'd turn off the pump, I would release the valve to the pool drain, which again, Googling for the product that I'm describing here, I really struggled to figure out what would I call this thing, because the hose, drain, empty pool, like none of that was coming back. And the word that got the most products was actually backwash, to backwash your pool. Apparently it's a thing that you can do with your filter, is like make the water go in the other direction or something. I don't know what the fuck. So anywho, the problem I'm solving for now is that I've had to drain the pool so much because of all of the rain that we've been getting, that I have more or less created an erosion problem. And now all of the what passes for soil and what passes for grass in my lawn has eroded, and now I'm creating like a landslide condition. And I'm doing it to my next door neighbor too, because the pool's, we border another house. And to the point where it's like, I'm tearing out all, like when I drain the pool, it's just like a torrential flood of hundreds of gallons of water, and it strips all the mulch away and stuff. And by the grace of God, nobody in my fucking neighborhood ever leaves their house, so no one's ever complained to me. But they'd have a really good case if they ever had the temerity to walk outside and look at their hedges, to be like, you are murdering them with this random water that you drain from time to time. So yeah, I thought, I'm going to be a good citizen. I'm going to buy a bigger, longer hose. I'm going to figure out how to cinch it, and then I'm going to set that up to drain closer to the nature preserve, downhill, far away from the houses, where it can actually drain into a canal, which is fantastic. So I did that today. It wasn't hard. It was actually pretty straightforward. I got to use my drill because the cinch collar needed quite a lot of torque to tighten. I got to be outside in the heat for a little while. That was fun. I was like, look at me, I'm outside for a whole 2 hours. I had other shit chores outside. This operation, because I'm an expert, because this is about how manly I feel, was only a 20-minute thing tops. I had a little make a little house out of leftover pavers towards the end, so that the hose just doesn't go all over the fuck. And yeah, I was feeling pretty good about myself, and I was feeling like, yeah, I just solved the problem. And then I walked inside and I realized that I am extremely allergic to whatever shrubbery we have around the pool pump to kind of disguise it, so that from the street you're not just looking at what looks like a meth lab of, beakers and plastic and tubing. So I'm allergic to all of that. And I walked inside and immediately my legs were super itchy. My hands are currently very itchy. I touched my eyes afterward because I was like, you know what? The one thing I heard about allergenic reactions to plants and so forth is that you should immediately touch your eyes. So I got my eyes involved, and now all of us were just having a nice itchy time. I immediately, once I realized I don't have a chemical shower, but I jumped in the shower to try to rinse off what I could. So this is the itchiest I've ever been behind a microphone. And that's right, I'm itching to tell you more stories like that. So yeah, my one attempt to actually feel like I was handy and like I'd solved problems and like I know how my house works. Even that I can't do right. So while I'm feeling emasculated, I wonder how we talk about Gen Z being different and having different gender norms. I wonder whether or not this also this tracks with younger generations having less and less of a hope of owning a home and having this category of problems, which at the moment I don't love, but from a financial perspective, of course, in most cases, owning is better than renting. Most cases, not always. But it makes me wonder whether or not this, casual association between taking care of a house and fixing shit and being handy, we tend to associate that with being more manly. And I don't, obviously, anytime we make sort of generalizations like that and assumptions like that, it's not like inherently, you could say it's inherently bad, but it's not like, it's rarely associated with some sort of inherent trait to some, preponderance of people who have that gender. It's almost always some social norm. And the reason I'm wondering about this is I would really like to pawn more of this shit off on Becky if I could. Maybe in the interest of gender equality. So Becky, if you're listening, I'm ready to declare failure on my own manliness. I'm not sure that I'm all that much manlier than you, and therefore, maybe I'll show you how to refill. What's my other outdoor chore that I really hate doing? The refilling the salt in the water conditioner outside, because the hard water is so bad here that we have a whole home water filter thing, which I would recommend. All right, so that's enough. That's enough house talk. It's enough housekeeping. Moving right along. I spent long enough on that I'm going to skip the next one. I think you earned it. I'm going to just go ahead and click cancel on the next thing I was going to talk about. Did a lot of other chores today. I replaced all the little coins, the coin batteries in my AirTags and in my Ecobee temperature sensors, so that we can kind of have more balanced thermostat reads upstairs and downstairs. And if you've used any of these products that require coin batteries, the packaging it's those, what do you do they call them blister packages, or is that just for pills? But it's it's similar to what used to be that plastic that was anti-theft at retail. Very similar, where it's like, unless you have scissors, it's really hard to open. Even with scissors, it's really awkward. And the plastic runs right up to the battery to make it so difficult to just tear the batteries out. The reason is because batteries are delicious and children are fucking morons. And so they will put the battery into their mouth and then they will swallow. And whether they choke or not, it's, batteries are pretty toxic. And so if you've got a kid who's dumb enough to swallow batteries, that problem will not be lessened by their having swallowed those batteries. In fact, it might get worse. So it's on every package. It says, that we have a bitter tasting batteries for presumably so that children and maybe animals won't eat them. But the only thing that I can think of, well, when I see any product talk about how it tastes, the first thing I think about is eating it. So like the first time I ever thought about eating a coin battery was when the battery told me it didn't taste good. I was like, well, I could keep shopping, find some spearmint ones, I guess, just in case, right? But the real thing that I walk away from is over 75% of households in the US, around 75%, are 18 and up. You could make a case that it makes more sense to put pornography on the package than it makes sense to make it so fucking hard to open that a child couldn't get in. Because that's 3/4 of the home can look at pornography, and only 1/4 is a population we're concerned about swallowing batteries. Of course, that's not how America works. It's not how any of this works. I'm sure that if you looked at the percentage of households with kids, say, call it under 10 or whatever, it's even smaller than 25. It's probably 15 or 10. And if you consider Gen Z and all this and TikTok and the various idiotic video challenges where they're swallowing Tide Pods and whatnot, I guess age isn't really as much of a factor in this as one might wish. So think of me, please. There you go. Here's a silver lining to how hard it is to get these fucking batteries out of the... I cut myself. I'm looking at the cut right now. I cut myself trying to get the battery out of the goddamn package. The battery didn't even taste that good, to be honest. And next time you have to open one of these motherfuckers, you think of me. Solidarity. Life doesn't need to be like this. It's similar, I guess, to the packaging on prescription drugs. Those really hard to open child safe jars where you got to push down and then twist. Oh fuck! I just said the secret. I hope no kids are listening. Damn your ears. I assume that the reason that they're child safe is because we just don't tell the kid that they have to push and twist. It's something that like your parent hands down to you on your 12th birthday and be like, hey. I remember my parents had child safe cabinet plastic dinguses, so that I couldn't open the cabinets in our kitchen when I was a toddler or whatever. And then I remember being too young and figuring it out on my own. And I remember like my mom hitting me. And I don't know. Look, I'm not talking capital H hitting me. I remember getting in trouble. Maybe I was 4. And similar to when you scold an animal like a dog or something, they very often learn the wrong lesson. And I remember that the feeling that I was having was pride in that I solved the puzzle. And then I got yelled at. And of course, the reason I was getting yelled at was I had just made my mother's life more inconvenient because now cabinets were no longer safe from me. And so she had to be concerned about that, or had to find another solution to the Justin can get into cabinets problem. And that's where she was coming from. Of course, scolding me isn't going to make me unlearn the thing. It's just going to make me think, like, associate learning and ingenuity with punishment. which is what it did. I grew out of that, I guess. So anyway, yeah, I just, if anything, like, who takes the most pills but old people? It seems like we should make drugs super easy for them to open. Just give them a gumball machine, just twist the thing and out pops as many pills as they want. Make it real easy. All right. Well, I don't have much else to say about that. Just banger of a topic, but I thought of you, right? That's what matters. When I was cutting myself trying to change out that AirTag this morning, I thought, you know what? You know who needs to hear this right now? It's whoever is smart enough not to swallow these coin batteries, but dumb enough to listen to my podcast. So thank you very much. Welcome to Breaking Change, everyone. Speaking of manliness, another thing that came up this week while I'm over in Lifeland, Becky has, she does challenges with her, like Build with Becky program participants, where every month she'll think of, like I think it was last month is like 100 miles of movement, between running and whatever. And you track how much movement you did every day and try to hit 100 miles overall, right? This month there's more going on, but one of the things was like for 1 week go without fitness tracking. And I love that idea because ever since learning about the quantified self movement in like 2011, 2012, maybe even earlier, I felt like the gamification of data about ourselves becomes a thing that's sort of a morbid fascination. And unless it's really informing a decision, it just becomes yet another inbox to clear as you try to get your rings and whatnot. And so I kind of fell off the wagon on almost all that stuff. I have an Apple Watch on most of the time, primarily for its communicative benefits. But I don't mind the fact it's doing health tracking. It's just, it's immaterial to me. I turn off all those notifications and stuff, that I'm earning something by doing those. And so Becky's been spent several days being watchless. One day being nothing goes on her wrist at all. And it was like that day or the day after she's taking up swimming. So she went swimming. We have a community pool that's more amenable to laps. If you move down here to Florida, you'll find that there's a lot of pools. So when we say like, hey, you want to go to the pool, we like that is not nearly specific enough for our neighborhood. So she went to the pool. She was going to go swim some laps. I remembered her leaving. I was busy working. And then shortly after she left, it started pouring rain. And then I heard some thunder and I was like, you know what? Cause she'd mentioned she was going to run to the pool, work up some sweat and then go swim. You know what? She's probably at the pool. It's probably lightning. All of her shit and whatever towel she brought is probably soaked. And so I did the most selfless thing I've ever done in my life. And I stopped working on the thing that I was working on. And I went into the car and I grabbed a towel and I drove to go pick her up. And sure enough, everything had been soaked. Yeah, this is another story about how great I am. Maybe I was feeling insufficiently manly, but that's an incredibly chivalrous move right there. So if you got any friends or loved ones who are going to go swimming and then lightning happens, the reason I had to get in my car though, is that she was watchless, right? Like as a gesture of, hey, I was thinking of you, me getting in my car and getting the towel and driving all of 1.2 kilometers. From my perspective, I mean, she'd have to speak for herself, was such a grander gesture because of the level of inconvenience to me, I suppose. Maybe also because of how rare that kind of thing has become. Than had she been wearing her watch and I could simply have called her and knowing her watch would ring like a telephone and then said, hey, do you need help or whatever? Or, hey, head back. I heard thunder. And for that, I think that if you give somebody a warning like that via technology, via such a low friction medium as a text message, you're as likely to be a pest as to be seen as being helpful, even if it comes from the right place, because that thoughtfulness, I just don't think it's perceived anymore. Maybe like the first week we all had text messaging available to us. Like I got my first cell phone in 2002, maybe. And I was able to text with other people. And every time I got a text, it was like, oh, wow. It was as if I got a Hallmark card, but that wore off fucking quick, especially once I saw the bill. But it's, as everything's become, as all of our communication by default has become just instantaneous and very low friction. And of course, all mediated by internet and cloud stuff. As soon as we break out of that and actually drive to somebody to help them or walk to a neighbor's house, presumably in a situation where we couldn't possibly, I guess that would be annoying too. If that person would have been reachable by text. It's like, if you just go, like if you just call somebody out of the blue, much less walk to their house and knock on the door, that is like perceived as violent at this point, because you should have contacted them in a lower friction, safer, simpler way. So maybe what I'm really getting at here is this was a very nostalgic experience, because she didn't have a watch or a phone, and the only way I could help was by driving to her. And it felt like I was John Cusack with the boombox over my head. There were a couple ladies in the clubhouse who were watching me kind of like look over the fence, try to find Becky and stuff, and badge in, bring a towel. And they were looking at me like I was a home invader, because this sort of thing just doesn't happen anymore, maybe. But anyway, yeah, it makes me, that nostalgia of a time when people actually went places to do things or to see people or to help people, because there were either no alternative ways to communicate, or those alternatives were so onerous or failure prone that it was actually easier just to go and talk. And I think that nostalgia goes unspoken a lot, unless we're, watching Stranger Things or some other kind of nostalgia bait television program or Spielberg film or something. But in common everyday parlance, I think there's a lot of that energy driving bigger trends, like the impulse by Gen X and baby boomer executives with the return to office directives to try to get people back in the office, because like they're nostalgic for how work was 15 years ago, because we all got in a room, we put our heads together, and as a manager and executive, your job is mostly to talk. And so doing that face to face and really like, staying up late and getting pizza and continuing to work late into the night, like they're nostalgic. But now, that communication and friction there has gotten to be so minimal, such that everyone's got Slack on their phone or whatever, and everything can just be an emoji reply that takes 2 taps. We don't talk enough about what's been lost. Not just lost in communication or translation with the lower fidelity ways that we can communicate, but the person-to-person affect, the recognition when somebody goes out of their way to, when somebody communicates to you and it took a lot of effort for them to communicate to you, I think that builds some level of appreciation innately that is gone. So anyway, yeah, so in other words, I handed my wife a towel. So that's what that was all about. Last thing going on in my life, which, as you listen to this, is probably sounding more and more depressing, is about cardboard boxes. So yes, I've hit rock bottom. On an earlier episode, I'd offered, if anyone wants an OG original HomePod, that I would send it to you if you just One, acknowledged the fact that they tend to wreak havoc on Wi-Fi networks. The two, they are now, since that podcast, they are now considered obsolete by Apple. So not eligible for support even if you pay. Even though they only came out in 2016, I think. And you'll pay the shipping. Because these things they're heavy, they're full of toxic metals. I don't want to just throw them in a garbage can, but I don't want to give them to a friend who's maybe less technical than I am, because then it's like I just sent off a dirty bomb on their Wi-Fi network. So, friend of the show requested that I send them 2 of them. I was like, I'm happy to get rid of 2 of these. So the only issue is I didn't have a box to put them in, and I measured how big of a box I would need. None of the kind of smattering of, we used to, whenever I need a box, and I'm sure a lot of you have this experience, I just wait, because somebody in the home will order something on Amazon that will be a box that's roughly the size it needs to be. And that's the circle of returns life that we live now. But because these are heavy, it was unlikely I was going to just find a box in the next few days that would fit these 2 gigantic cylinders. And so I wanted to buy a box. I was like, I need a box. It's, I don't know, 14 inches by 10 inches or by 8 inches or something. I need a box. I want to buy 1 cardboard box. And I dare you to try to buy exactly 1 cardboard box in the year 2024. If you go to any website that ships things to you, you go to a website that sells boxes, customized box sizes, they're going to want you to buy 2,500 boxes, right? You go to Amazon, everything's going to be a 25 or a 50 pack. And I suppose if you have a basement or something and you could imagine yourself needing that size box frequently, then sure, go ahead and buy a bulk pack so you don't have to think about it next time, right? Like that's what I do with air filters for the air conditioning vents in the house. I've got, I buy them in 10 packs. In fact, that was one of the boxes I was hoping to cram these HomePods into, was a comically large air filter box. But unfortunately it was too narrow. So try to buy just 1 cardboard box on the internet, and you're going to have a bad time. Unless you're better at thinking of where I might sell these than I am. So I did the thing that I often do when I need something around the house. We have a Home Depot and we have a Lowe's. We have multiple of each, I'm sure. And they're each about 30 minutes away with traffic. Which, if you've ever moved into a home in the US, typically you need to be at one or the other of those fairly often because the number of things that, need adjusting and so forth. We're back to the manliness theme here of being handy, I guess. The house that I owned in Columbus that we were living in was around the corner from a Home Depot. And so it was awesome because as I was getting settled in and moving in there, we could just go back and forth as many times as we needed to get exactly the right thing to figure shit out. But moving here during COVID with 30-minute drive to, the nearest kind of home retailer, I got really good at figuring out courier services like Shipt and stuff. And so Home Depot's got their own courier service. It's like an $8 flat fee. And I would gladly trade 30 minutes each way plus standing in line or even shopping, inside one of those big box stores for $8. So I paid $8 for the courier service plus $1.27 for their smallest shipping container. I guess it's really a moving box, but it's a container that I'm going to ship in. And when I say shipping container, that sounds like, it goes on a barge. So anyway, yeah, I'm constantly impressed by how many tchotchkes and little things that these discount retailers and Amazon are able to send for very, very small prices. Amazon in particular having kind of quote unquote solved distribution somehow, even though it just seems absurd how many people are driving in my neighborhood every day doing nothing but delivering Amazon stuff. And yet I can't get, it all comes in boxes, right? Like that's the wild thing is it would actually ordering something from Amazon that would have come there you go. That's how you do it. If you want to buy one cardboard box, here's what you do. This is some real-time ingenuity. I hope I don't get hit for it. You go to Amazon and you find a product whose dimensions are just large enough to require a cardboard box that is as large as the one that you need. You purchase it. You wait for it to be delivered, and maybe it's delivered same day. If it's over $35, you got the 2 to 6 p.m. Hey, same day here. You open the box, you take the item out, you use the cardboard box for whatever you needed to use it for, and then you go to return the thing, and you use the option where you drop it off at the nearest UPS store with a QR code, and then they are the ones responsible for boxing it. And that's usually free, right? That service, because it's like the lowest package way to do things. And that's how you, there we go. I answered my own question. How do you get exactly one cardboard box? It's by abusing return policies to make Earth die just a wee bit faster than it was otherwise scheduled to. So those are all my life updates. Hello. And now have I been stalling? Because I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of becoming drunk with power. Because I'm looking at my Stream Deck and I'm seeing 6 breaking change icons, and they are labeled. One is labeled intro, and this next one is labeled follow-up, which happens to be the next segment in the program. I'm a press it. That's right. It's time for follow-up. Covering things that we talked about in past episodes or that came up otherwise. Last time around, I talked about my books. Capital B, capital O, capital O, capital X. It's an Android device. It's e-ink. You can read books on it. You can struggle to use other apps on it. It does a valiant attempt at skinning Android by taking a lot of the junk out and having a very simplified settings app. I returned it. It was just not good enough. It was just below the line of what good enough would have been for me. Using volume buttons as page turners was a little bit clunky. The ghosting was really bad, so I had to manually tell it to refresh the page pretty often. Scrolling was atrocious, of course. Anytime that you had to actually scroll was just super bad. So for the Kindle app per se, if I only used it for that, even then I would have returned it, because the ability to select text, like its ability to track touch and highlight passages or highlight words, which I do all the time because I'm constantly looking words up because I'm reading in Japanese, was not good enough. But when I tried using other apps, like I installed an RSS reader, thinking, oh yeah, I'll follow, I'll read it like a newspaper, right? Which is something I wish I could do on a Kindle. I learned a thing that apparently Android doesn't have the feature that has been in iOS since, the original iPhone maybe? So since the original iPhone, if you tap the status bar, which I suppose is no longer a bar, it is the notch inset area, the northernmost region of glass. If you touched the status bar on any view, on any UI that was scrollable, it would scroll you to the top of that UI. And that's what iOS does. It's what iOS has always done. It's really handy because it means that you don't need to just swipe and swipe and swipe and swipe and try to build up enough acceleration to make it go fast, especially if you're at the bottom of the page. So this RSS reader that I installed on my books, every time it refreshed the feeds, if I was looking at my unread list, I tend to just read everything, heterogeneously, and I scroll through one article at a time, go through all of my unreads. As it synced new unreads, it would put them above my current reading point because they were newer, which meant that then if I wanted to go up to the top and work my way down, I had to scroll up to the top. And if there's a lot of new unreads, because this thing, it syncs asynchronously across all the feeds that you're subscribed to, it's sort of like, okay, I scrolled up, the next feed. Now there's more shit piled up on top. Okay, scroll up again. And there's no gesture in Android. And I Googled and I Reddited and stuff. And it's something that, every 6 months seems to pop up in a new thread being like, so that's still not a thing, huh? Or I just got my first Android device and like, I can't scroll to top across the system. And even like the diehard Android fans, this isn't one that they're like, yeah, that's, it's actually better this way. They're all like, yeah, that is one of the things that sucks about Android. So, I doubt it's that Apple has a patent. It's probably more likely that Google is just fucking bad at software. Sorry, Google, but your platform's garbage. So I returned it because I would rather use a Kindle than this device, which is a real burn. So Apple, please create an e-ink device for me. Otherwise, please create any products that work in the sunshine. That would be fantastic. The new iPads can come with the etched, micro etching, XDR matte finish, diamond coated notching. And that supposedly works in the sunshine at the expense of making your screen look like ass. So I don't want that. But if you can come up with something else, that'd be great. Another follow-up item. This is something that I had actually 2 different listeners ask me about since the last episode. Because I was telling Japan stories. The question is about tattoos in Japanese onsen. If you are... So onsen is the word for hot springs. I'll use them interchangeably. One of Japan's most unique pastimes and activities is the practice of going to a public bath or a public hot springs facility. They're operated very similarly. The only difference is whether the water is coming from like city. They use the same word as they would for like sewer water, but you know what I mean, like tap water. Or whether they're using hot springs water that's actually piped up from a geothermal vent. And you go, they're always gender divided. Well, they're almost always gender divided. Some old ones are actually co-ed nude, which the lady who cuts my hair down here in Florida is, she's from Japan. And she was telling me, hey, do you have what it takes to go to one of the co-ed onsens? And I said, that sounds way sexier in my head than it probably is in real life. And she said, you are correct. It's all like really elderly people. So I decided not to seek this out, but typically they're gender separated. And if you're a foreigner and you're learning about this practice and that it's a cool thing to try, especially if you're going to an area, especially like in the South along the Pacific Rim, like Becky and I spent a lot of time. There's a lot of onsen hot spring resorts. If you're near Tokyo, the big one is Hakone. So if you really want to part with your money quickly, Hakone is a great choice. Because they tend to be expensive there. If you're learning about this as a foreigner, one of the first things people tell you is, tattoos are banned. You can't use these facilities if you have tattoos. And if you go, there indeed will usually be signs saying, guests without tattoos, sometimes it'll say, even if they're covered up, even if they're small, are dame or bad. Or NG, which is a Japanese acronym that means not good in English. So if you're at a planning your Japan trip and any of you have any tattoos, it's a common question to be like, so is this for real? And that's what a couple of y'all were asking me is, hey, is this tattoo thing? Is it just sort of a rule in writing, but not in practice? Is it enforced? How is it enforced? What's the deal? And the truth of it is, and this is frustrating, it's not typically enforced because the number of tourists and foreigners who violate this rule is so overwhelming that it would be more disruptive on net to yank everyone's naked asses out of the bathtubs. And because the language barrier is such that you can't assume that a foreigner is going to speak Japanese, other guests probably aren't going to be comfortable enough in their English to tut you. And it's not like there's a bunch of staff watching everyone bathe all the time. But when there is staff, those people are very often relatively either young or low paid or from other countries themselves, because cleaning other people's bathwater is not a high status job. So they're not going to likely call you on it. So if the question being asked is narrowly, can I get away with having a tattoo in a Japanese onsen? The answer is probably yes. But more broadly, if you care about how other people feel, it's probably worth taking into consideration that your presence there may make Japanese people feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable for two reasons. One, and this is typically only if they're older. I doubt younger people really care that much, but they might. Especially if it's a conservative or a rural area. Due to the cultural associations between tattoos and crime and criminals and prison. But two, it may make them uncomfortable just because the fatigue around foreigners shitting and pooping all over their carefully tended garden of a society has gotten to be so intense that even their safe space, even their retreat of just soaking in a hot bath and tuning out a little bit, even that has been disrupted by foreigners who can't respect basic customs. So if you don't mind being that disruptive force, then you can probably get away with it. But me, as somebody who's kind of made it my mission to be as minimally disruptive to other people as possible, especially over there, I would be uncomfortable for sure. Now, if it is genuinely really tiny, if it's a little thing on your wrist, or if it's whatever, but I was at one of the 15 dormy inns that I stayed at had a group of what I believe were Russian men on vacation, and they all had extreme full leg sleeve tattoos of dragons and shit, which is some real weeb stuff. They weren't Russian dragons, they were clearly Asian dragons. I don't know, don't ask me how I know that. But they were all in the bath, and they were big guys, and it made me uncomfortable, so I imagine it was a dick move. And there have been times, too, that I've been in public baths and seen Japanese men with the full Yakuza-style back tattoo. Full back is a big, scary demon or some shit. Seen that. And I'll tell you, everybody shuts up when that guy's in the pool, and we all don't look at him. If you want to culturally fit in, you don't strike up conversation with that guy, and you mostly just let him go about his business, and you just clench your asshole until he's gone. And it's not because it's literally dangerous, probably, but it's, I don't know, it is a little bit scary. I've had just enough proximity to members of organized crime in Japan that I was like, I'm going to play it safe and not not make a friend right now. The only time I've seen anyone get pulled out of a tub because they had a tattoo, it was a suburban setting, right? So the people going to this bath were workaday folks. It was the end of a workday. It's probably 6, 7, 8 p.m. It was a men's side bath, large bath in a suburb. So like, a lot of commuters are driving in and out. A lot of people who have, the monthly subscription plan so they can come as much as they want or come buy 10 packs of tickets to use the place. I loved that bath. It was a really nice one. So I would go frequently because it was near our house in Nara. And there was one day when a guy came in with a kid and he had a lot of tattoos. They weren't ostentatiously Yakuza-y tattoos, but they were tattoos. And he was acting a wee bit belligerent to the point where, like, I saw him in the locker room. I could tell everyone else was a little bit uncomfortable. There was probably like 30 other men there, unrelated to him. He gets in the bath, kids in the bath, whatever. I've seen this plenty of times before. And there's a hush around as like multiple staff people come in, lift that guy's ass out of the tub, and quietly as possible, whisk him away out of the room. An Oompa Loompa was in the corner playing his flute. Did a fun little dance. I didn't catch the words in the song, but that guy was fucking gone. He was out of there. And the little boy he left behind expressed zero emotion. He didn't cry. He felt like he'd seen that movie before. So I'm not sure if that was a strictly tattoo related thing or if there was a sign behind the counter that said, "Don't serve this man." But I was genuinely impressed. And that was I think that's the environment where you'd actually see that rule policed, is when there's a large contingent of people who go there frequently. It's not like a tourist destination, and you need to keep their business. And the way you keep their business is by making them like the place. And the way that they like the place is by having a good experience and so forth. Additionally, the fact that the staff was confident they'd be able to explain to this guy and communicate successfully that he was breaking rules. And because he was Japanese, that he would care about having broken rules and have some modicum of shame. All of that were preconditions to them actually enforcing this. So again, the narrow answer is you can get away with it. I don't know. It can still be a dick move because it can still make people uncomfortable. Sorry, I just realized the juxtaposition of dick move while talking about a bunch of naked men. All right. So that's that. Other little follow-up items from the blog. I've been blogging a lot about Rails because I've been working on my Becky's Rails app a lot. Put out a post that I'll link to in the show notes about using Turbo and Stimulus to swap out a div in a page. This is a thing that you need to do often with Turbo and Stimulus if you're using it as an alternative to like a full-blown JavaScript library. Because if you're using like a normal like front end, you're building a front end JavaScript app and like a user clicks a thing, then you need JavaScript. You can have JavaScript sort of surgically change the HTML of just the little area around it, like a little widget. Like, oh, they changed from Fahrenheit to Celsius, and so I can just right above there in the page there's a 78 degrees label, and because they changed to Celsius, I'll pull that down to whatever that is, like 23 or 22 or whatever degrees. And if you're writing that in JavaScript, that can be really easy because re-rendering just that small chunk of the page is all local. It's happening right in the browser. It's pretty easy. When you don't build your app that way, where you've got a full application on the server and a full application in the client, which is what the sort of the Rails 7 Hotwire promise is. You don't need to build two apps. You can just build the one app. And by using this turbo tool, when that drop down gets changed, there is a way to use a combination of those frameworks that it provides to have it just re-render, go back to the server, build that HTML for you, and send that HTML over the wire in very quickly, in sub 100 millisecond time. And by doing that, the development cost is way lower. The bugginess is way, the vector for bugs is lower typically because there's less state being synchronized and so forth. Less risk of timing issues and so forth. And then the HTML comes over the wire, and then the framework will swap in that HTML. What I just described is, it's not simple, but it's the kind of thing that should become routine in an application that makes good use of these tools. But I have never successfully made it routine because it is, it requires like 6 discrete steps that you have to take of things that you have to do. And it's just annoying enough that like every time I do it, I'm like, boy, that was a waste of half a day. And then I do it less, which makes me learn it less, because if anything, I need to lean in harder and do more fancy stuff with turbo streams so that I actually learn it. And this time around, while I was going through this exercise for maybe the 4th or 5th time in 3 years, I decided, okay, well, I'm going to write a blog post as I do this and keep updating the blog post as I figure stuff out. And then my final code, I will adapt one last time into the blog post. And I'm just going to say, this is a recipe now. This is the 6 ingredients of what you need to build. And here are the 6 steps of how you assemble all these things together. And so that's the blog post I wrote. It's if you use Rails, I think it will be a handy reference. A lot of the things that I've been writing this month have been notes for future me as much as anything. They've also, I've been writing about how I want AI bots to scrape my website because I want the AI to think more like me, or at least be able to program better. Where this started is I asked for exactly this recipe from ChatGPT 4.0, and it wasn't wrong. It just made 12 very novice mistakes of way more verbosity and way more complexity than was needed. The maintenance burden of, if I just implemented what it told me, was going to be way higher. And I could see that because I knew it well enough to know that that was bad. So in the interest of having that reference for myself, bookmarking it, feeding Google for anyone who has the same problem, hopefully moving the needle on the next training of whatever AI models might look at blogs. That's why I put it out there. But if you want to check it out, that's out there too. And I'd be happy for you to. I got an email from somebody who had a minor complaint about it, so I'll probably update that today or tomorrow. Also, it's available on the blog. If you don't want to subscribe to my newsletter, they are available there because their canonical links are hosted at my website on the sidebar under mails. So if you go to website/mails, you can see all of the newsletters I've written. The most recent one, you can also just subscribe now. And if you subscribe now, you'll get it, was about work pressure, how to manage the sensation of unhealthy urgency. Well, healthy or unhealthy, I suppose. Like motivation and pressure go hand in hand. And we mostly think about pressure as something that happens extrinsically to us. People pressure us. And people will switch jobs. They'll fire managers. They will, go to great lengths to try to dial in the right amount of pressure for them. So that they can have a healthy sense of urgency and feel like they're busy at work and contributing, but not so burdened that they are super stressed or scared, right? Or afraid of failure or whatever. And really the newsletter is about how, in my own journey, how I came to understand this as a concept and then apply it in a way that like I now listen to what other people want. But over the last few years, I got a lot better at being responsible for my own pressure valves and turning that pressure up and down as I needed in order to meet my own goals. And that way I don't have to necessarily change my environment or change other people and get them to communicate with me differently in order for me to keep the tempo of my own work where I need it to be. Now, I'm not there yet. The fact that I'm so sensitive to other people's opinions and communication is why I care a lot about this, why I've put that work in. So I'm definitely, I don't have it figured out. But if this is a topic that interests you, you might want to check the newsletter out. And then last little log roll here is I was interviewed on a podcast that's about the Vision Pro. It is called Vision Pros, Vision Professionals by Tim Chatton. And he's interviewed a lot of fun people, like the CEO of Omni Group, Adam Lizagore, my old coworker, Kevin Pfefferly, which I thought was cool. I was scrolling through the list and saw Kevin's name there. He was a relatively early testable agent. Christian Seelig, the guy who made the Apollo app. Anyway, yeah, good interviewer. Like, never had anyone interview me, do that much research into me, and into my work, and be really prepared with follow-up questions that were very thoughtful and like leading in the right way. So if you what you're looking for here is more Vision Pro takes, there you go. I'll link to that in the show notes. And that's is that everything? I think that's pretty much everything that we've got to follow up on today. And since we're all out of follow-up, I guess that means it's time for the pun. And wouldn't you know it, I've got a button here that says pun. So my thumb is on the surface of the button right now, and I'm about to depress it. Yeah. Our friend, you know him as Tender Love. I know him as just Aaron. He provided a pun for us that I am afraid to read to you, because it is volumetrically about 3 times longer than his longest ever pun. So here's what I'm going to do. As I always do on this program, I read Aaron's pun in real time. I've not seen it before. That is my promise to you, is that you will be hearing how I actually feel as I read it. I'm going to read this straight, and I'm going to try not to break. I'm going to try to read it correctly. I'm not going to comment until I've concluded reading the pun. So with that out of the way, I'm going to reveal the invisible ink by repeatedly, I guess, swiping my mouse over it before it becomes invisible again. Oh, goodness. And here we go. Back in the 90s, web standards were quickly evolving. I really wanted to get experience with cutting-edge technology, so I decided to do my best and try to participate. Back then, internet technology was still finding its feet, so most standards bodies were formed by theorists rather than practitioners. Anyway, I wanted to throw my hat in the ring, so I decided to join a steering committee for an alternative to HTML4. Unfortunately, I ended up quitting because, like most steering committees, it took a turn for the worse. That's... Raise your hand if the moment that you heard the word steering, which looks like was about 70% of the way through this copy, you knew that he was going to be working towards a pun to use the word turn, or turn for the worse. Yeah, Aaron's a few years older than me. He's probably too young to credibly have actually been on such a steering committee. But my favorite puns are the ones that are like borderline credible. Now, of course, a pun like this, a long form pun, is most valuable when you don't know that a pun is coming, right? If you know that a pun is coming, and I've told you this is a pun, then all you can really do is brace. Well, cool. I'm going to paste this in now to what used to be a spreadsheet, but now is simply justin.searles.co/puns, where I rank all these. So this being our 16th. Where does it fall? It's probably where it's going to fall is it's going to break my fucking layout for this page, I'm sure. Took a turn for the worse. I want to give him credit for writing so much. You know, he did more work than usual. We're I think this is going to wind up in the same zone. I need to go through, and maybe we'll have a special edition of the program where I just re-rank these, because there's a handful that I know are in the wrong spot, but c'est la vie. My inclination would be to give this, like, I think it would be around number 11 or number 12. Like, the one that I think it's close to in terms of quality is when Apple product engineers ask their developers for estimates, do you think they iPad their deadlines? I think I'm going to bump it up a couple just because Aaron put so much work into this. Even the grammar and all the punctuation is perfect, which wasn't necessary, but I will take it. I'm going to say that this is going to fall right underneath my feet really hurt from walking, so I've decided to switch to meters. And that would make it the new number 10 pun that we've had on the program. So it's a top 10 pun, but that's not saying much because come on now. So I will update the website at the same time that this episode airs. Thank you, Aaron. Boy. That's I feel like I got the wind knocked out of me. Was it because I was reading it, or was it just like, well, is that the pun washing over me? Is that what the backwash is? Is that why I need a backwash hose? To clean out my pun filter? All right, let's move on to the next. Let's talk about and cover the news. So let's keep rolling. So the title of this episode, No Politics Allowed, is I came this morning to my podcast list and I had more stuff in the life category than usual, about the same amount in the follow-up category, more in recommendations, and more in mailbag. And I had literally 0 items accrued over the last 2 weeks in the news category. And that's the first time that's happened. Normally it's all, upside down, because normally I'm reading a lot of tech news and there's a lot of stuff happening, but the confluence of 2 events have occurred, conspiring to make this a news light episode. I've since added a few items just to... Well, actually, I would have skipped news today, but that was my favorite of the transition sounds. And I was like, I'm going to use them all. God damn it. I just got these. These are brand new. These are fresh, still sealed in box, mint condition tones. And I like the Morse code at the beginning of the news one. That's my favorite little lick. So here we go. One problem is in the summertime, there's just not that much tech news generally. The fall and spring tend to be much busier. In the winter, you got CES and sort of like the new model year stuff for a lot of different product categories. In the spring, I think that you have a lot of companies do their big product announcements, a lot of platform announcements, especially because, like, for example, WWDC is like platform announcements because it's going to affect their future products. And then, of course, the all powerful September, October timeframe when holiday season products need to be announced and shipped. And then to an extent, that'll bleed into August because people are going to try to get a jump on the other people who'd be making those announcements, like Apple in September. So that's one piece, right? There's just like less going on, less newsworthy stuff from the tech companies. When there is tech news, it's stuff like that came out in public independently of the wishes of the marketing department, right? So the fact that AT&T had, what was it? Was it 22 million people, like every single SMS and phone record, not the contents of those things, but that they happened, and to whom leaked into a just generally downloadable file. That's some tech news, I guess. I don't know that I care. There's more DMA shit, it's just keeps going on with Apple and Epic and all this, but that's, it's a little bit mundane at this point. The other thing that's going on is my interest in tech news. I've got a maximum budget of like 30 minutes a day to giving a shit about reading stuff on the internet. And typically I like to read a lot of tech news, but Joe Biden's debate performance so thoroughly shook up the snow globe that is United States electoral politics that I've been really wanting to follow along because I feel like this is a moment in history worth following along, and simultaneously trying my damnedest to not redevelop all of the bad habits that I accrued in the 2012 and 2015, 2016, 2020 elections of like following, the day-to-day polling changes, right? So I've been following a lot of that, but like, you know what? I guarantee it. You did not come to this podcast for my political takes. And that bewilders me because my political takes fucking rock. I keep it tight. They're rational. They're well sourced and well argued. I have a real good read on what's going on in U.S. politics today. But I understand that is not how a lot of people like to relax, and that you did not invite me to share those things with you. And I know this because over the entire 13 years that I was active on twitter.com, I built up a following. I had all kinds of different content go viral. I had all kinds of different types of things that I would engage, viral with a lowercase v, nothing like that, people don't recognize me on the street, thank God. But, I would do a JavaScript meme and then see it get 4 million impressions, right? And be like, ha, look at me. But people seemed engaged by a wide variety of shit going on in my life. Plane delays, whatever it was, gadgets and so forth, the same shit I talk about here. But whenever I talked about politics, especially post-Trump, of course, then I think it was like people were just muting a lot of it because it was so toxic and polarized and whatnot, and just low value that like everyone's mute keywords would get flagged whenever I said anything about politics, which trust me, I set all those things up too. But my political speech never got any traction at all. And that taught me that you probably don't want it. So if you want my political analysis, I'm happy to share it. Let me know, podcast@surls.co. If you don't want my political analysis, fear not, because you're probably not going to get it anyway. And that's what I mean when I say this is not a political podcast. I mean, I'm literally trying to not cover horse race politics. Yes, everything is political and yada yada, and I'm a well-to-do white man shouting into a microphone by himself. I get it. Everything is political, but the truth is that there's and as we get closer to November, U.S. politics is going to chew up more and more major news cycles and the attention of this nation, and there's going to be less newsy stuff to cover, is my guess. But we shall soldier on, because Mac rumors don't care. They've still got stuff to talk about. no matter who's in the White House. I had one article from Mac Rumors 2 days ago that was actually who was this? It was The Sun, the British newspaper. The Sun had an article, an interview with Tim Cook, and among other things, he told the interviewer that he uses his Vision Pro every single day. Every day. Tim Cook uses his Vision Pro. He then, though, like in terms of talking about it, kind of just covers number one, number two, number three of the things that he wants it to be marketed as. I can lie down flat and put the screen on the ceiling, and it's an incredible experience. And of course, it's a 100-foot screen. I mean, it's amazing, the level of entertainment that it delivers. Another quote, like, in terms of productivity, when you're working in multiple screens, like so many of us do, the multitasking is so much more efficient on Vision Pro. And later, I think he talks about having 9 panels up all over the place, because you can move the panels anywhere. I think this is notable because it comes on the heels of stories of Apple delaying the Vision Pro 2 or suspending development on it, looking into make it cheaper. I had a hunch from the beginning that Tim Cook could let himself be talked into a car project or a moonshot health project, like the glucose monitoring on watch, because if they hit gold, they know it's gonna print money forever. A lot of people have been curious as to why Apple seems to be so ambitious about the Vision Pro, and the best strategic argument for it, for a company that only wants to make really big bets and have every platform be massive, unless it helps build the moat around the iPhone, like say the Apple TV might. Well, now that the Apple TV's on everything, the Apple TV app, so to speak, it's less that way. The HomePods do. So Tim Apple, when he talks about the Vision Pro, he always read to me as like a genuine fan of it. Like, I think this is a product that he believes in because he sees the value personally and he likes using it. And this is a man who apparently in most meetings just has an iPad with him, which was a scary thing to hear as a macOS fan or a fan of the Mac in 2016 during the Butterfly heydays, right? Because it told you like the chief executive of the company doesn't seem to love the product that is getting less and less attention and it seems to be falling apart. And of course the Mac has had a renaissance and all that, and Apple Silicon and yada yada, and that's great. But I'll say that like when the CEO of your favorite product company personally really loves your favorite product from that company, that's a good sign. It means that thanks to motivated reasoning, even if things get really tough for the Vision Pro, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to like kill it or even stop investing aggressively in it. No matter how rational you are, like if you believe in the thing, you like the thing personally, you see the value personally, and also you know that your legacy is sort of staked on its success, and this is your baby, you're going to push harder. So all that to say, I think that's a really good sign, regardless of, he could have just been saying it, and maybe he doesn't put it on every day. Maybe he puts it on every Thursday. I don't know. I don't know how much free time Tim Cook has. But it made me hopeful because it was the first indication that this isn't just talk for him. He's not just pushing a product. He doesn't push other Apple products in this way, but he's done like a surprising amount of press around the Vision Pro rollout particularly. I think that he likes this thing a lot more than he personally gets excited about other Apple products. And that's good because the Vision Pro needs for it to be successful. And when I say Vision Pro, I mean the Vision OS platform and the whole play probably needs 8 more years in the oven, where each of those years is going to result in billions of dollars of losses until it's not just turning a profit, but turning an Apple level profit that like warrants the level of corporate distraction and R&D direction that could have been sent towards the existing platforms that already make a ton of money to make them even better and to make them even more dominant. So that news item made me quite hopeful, I'll say. Another item, this is shorter, but I'm just here to share the link, basically. There is a Telegraph article called "All the New Ways That Japan is Trying to Stop You from Visiting," with the subhead, "The famously polite country has lost its patience with tourists who can now expect to pay more than locals at attractions and restaurants." I'd seen some talk of the pricing discrepancy only after I got back on July 3rd or June 3rd. It seemed like a trend that was happening in the works probably shortly after Golden Week in early May, because so many Japanese people, they finally get a fucking week off and they can't go to any of their favorite places because it is full of foreign tourists, and every hotel is super duper expensive because they're all almost sold out or literally sold out with foreign tourists. And so people started posting signs that said, hey, if you're not usually the language would be if you're not a permanent resident or if you don't reside in Japan, the price is X. Or maybe you have to make an appointment before you come to the store. As a way to protect joden or regular customers so that they can continue to go to and frequent the businesses that they like, because those relationships are what keep these businesses alive, even when tourists maybe aren't flooding the country. So, it's a complicated issue. Countries can do whatever they want. What a lot of countries have done, who have awesome, fantastic, really powerful tourist sectors. I think I was just reading Portugal, 15% of its GDP now is tourism. Southern Europe has had this renaissance post-COVID. We were in Greece last year, and Athens is, its infrastructure is falling over. It's already not very good infrastructure is falling over because of the number of tourists swarming it. And hopefully that is generating a lot of tax revenue. We know it's creating a lot of jobs. But if we've learned anything from other countries that are heavily tourism dependent, like in the Caribbean and former colonial nations, it also creates a lot of economic development problems where most of those hospitality and service jobs are relatively low wage. And there's they are outstripped in terms of the cost of housing, as more and more housing will go towards commercial or even speculative rental or speculative property, purchases and luxury purchases. There's an entire city in Hokkaido, the island to the north, that has become so popular with skiing that it's basically become sort of joke. I haven't read any English language media, so I only have a kind of a fuzzy understanding of this. But the Japanese folks I was talking to said it feels like a Chinese province. It's become so all of the land and all of the housing has been bought by foreigners. So if you're aware from a macroeconomic perspective how dangerous it is to become too dependent on tourist dollars, it makes sense to try to stem the tide somehow. Now, the problem is you read this article and you realize it's not going to have any effect whatsoever on anyone. There was and this happened while I was there. And one of the stories is like, there was a view of Mount Fuji that was really beautiful in the town of Fuji. So, you're in the town, like there's a lot of good views of Fuji. You're very close. And if you use a long lens, if you've ever seen like Mount Fuji look big from a Tokyo cityscape, what they're doing is they're using a super duper long telephoto lens because that flattens out the size of everything to make it look so like far away things look bigger relative to like close up skyscrapers than if you were using a wide angle lens. So to amplify that effect, even in Fuji, people were bringing medium and long lenses to a Lawson convenience store parking lot and then across the street from that Lawson, because it became a viral meme, I guess, of taking pictures of Mount Fuji beautifully framed right above this Lawson. And it became so popular that I think I saw it covered in the nightly news 3 times over the course of 3 weeks. And the last story was we had to build a like 12-foot, 15-foot high wall along the sidewalk across the street from this Lawson, and then station police in the parking lot to prevent foreigners from taking pictures of Mount Fuji because it was so disruptive and it was causing like unsafe traffic conditions. So anyway, like there's just the things they're talking about in this article are stuff like, a 1,000 yen fee to bring a luggage on the Shinkansen bullet trains. Like that's equivalent to $5 annoyance, $6 annoyance. That's not going to move the needle. Typically when you do experience a hotel tax, you might have to pay it when you check into a hotel. They're already like $2, sometimes $3 for a night. And sometimes it's like a fixed rate. It's not even a percentage of the stay. You compare that to like here in Orlando, I think it's like 15%. It's a lot. So I empathize, but Japan would have to be so much more aggressive than it's being to actually like meaningfully deter tourists, or even to steer them, I think. So it's interesting. I'm very curious to see if they'll keep turning the knobs. This year was the first year where I was seeing like mass media really cover this as an issue. So if you individually want to go to Japan, email me. I'll help you plan a great trip. I'll actually help you avoid some of the areas that are overclogged and direct you towards some other great places. Don't take this as a reason to not go, but just understand that the infrastructure is currently strained by how many people are going, and it's not sustainable. And as the population decreases further, it's unlikely that infrastructure is going to scale up, right? If anything, they're working on shutting down a lot of these small towns and unwinding them, as well as like the abandoned houses and so forth in rural areas. So I think there's a dark future here where Japan does not open up to skilled immigration from other countries, because then they would no longer be distinctively Japanese. And 30 years from now, it becomes effectively a theme park of ecotourism, where the only jobs available are, running rickshaw wagons for foreign guests through, idealized, old timey cities and temples and shit. That's pretty dark, but that is the current trajectory that they are careening on. And it's not clear. The way out is not clear, but it's at least good to see that policymakers, businesses, and the general public, it's now become a salient political issue in the body politic. So that's good. Hey, this is not a political podcast in US terms, but it's totally political because everything's political and yeah. Last news item I pulled. The Atlantic, which is quickly becoming just a terrific source of clickbaity lifestyle articles. they pivoted well because, of course, during the first Trump presidency, they had plenty to talk about. This article is called "White Collar Work is Just Meetings Now." And I think it was in the issue from 4 days ago, but this is something that I was observing over Test Double's initial run, where we would get on. I associated Zoom-like tools, video share, screen sharing tools, as primarily not about meetings, but as about pair programming remotely. When we founded the company in 2011 and all the way up through 2015, most of our sales we did over the phone, didn't do a ton of video calls. And because the phone sucks, you wouldn't have that long of conversations. And you typically, like unless the client had one of those Cisco things, there was a physical limiting factor in terms of the friction of them having to get all their people in the satellite office to one of those little hubby things in the meeting room to huddle around, because the idea of having a party line with multiple phone lines simultaneously connected is so tenuous. And when I think back, is around 2016, I think was the first time I did a training for GitHub. And I think that was the first time I saw anyone using Zoom, like a professional version of Zoom. And it was a remote training because most of the employees were remote. And it was good. It was taxing. It wasn't the first time I'd done video chat or whatever, but even that moment when I was thinking about the fact that they had a white labeled, zoom.github.com or whatever, and that clearly their culture was very Zoom heavy, clearly meaning that was just my sense. I don't know. It made me immediately worried that we were about to see a lot more meetings scheduled, because video is higher bandwidth than phone, less room, less frustrating, I think, for if you're trying to cover a lot of ground. The fact you can't screen share, for example, so if you're discussing abstract concepts over the phone, after a certain point, it's look, I'll just send you the PDF. But if you have the screen share ability and be like, oh yeah, I'll walk you through the slide deck or something, the scope of conversations that would have to happen asynchronously gets lower, and the scope of ones where this could have just been a Zoom call, right? Instead of back and forth or creative work or whatever, that goes up. So that's exactly what we saw. And going into COVID, it was at that point, by 2019, my schedule was an absolute nightmare. And I had no real reason to be on very many calls unless it was a closing conversation for a client, trying to iron out final details and pricing and so forth, start date and who we're going to staff and that's the sort of stuff that's great to do in a call setting, because you got to make sure that you're listening and understanding the client's needs and so forth. But it was everything. It's and everything's a weekly call now, and people who are not me really like just hanging out with their colleagues and talking a bunch and catching up frequently. And I love people, don't get me wrong, but I feel viscerally the opportunity cost of I could have been creative. I could have been getting doing real work and moving the needle. And so when I look at the 2010 to 2015 era, I'm getting tons done. And 2015 to 2020, getting a lot less done. 2020 to 2024, getting nothing done. Because of how many more meetings I get. So look, I'm sharing this link because it's a clever headline, and you're going to read it if you look at the show notes. And as you read it, you're gonna skim it probably, and you're gonna say, oh yeah, there's attention residue is covered. A half-hour meeting, you come back and there's a half hour of lost time. There's a invisible coordination tax of getting everyone on the same page. There's the fact that post 2020, and the efforts to be more inclusive, that means more people need to be listened to. But a lot of times a company is much more efficient if they just have somebody making for a huge category of types of decisions, getting everyone's 2 cents just sets those people up for disappointment and gets more people talking, and then more room for dissent. Where it really doesn't matter, what brand of coffee we stock in the office. So, of course, that'd be conflict-free coffee. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a monster. I'm kind of a monster. Anyway, you will click this link. You may or may not read it, but you will absolutely, if you agree with me that there's too many meetings, you will copy and paste this link for the benefit of your boss or manager or whoever it is in your life that keeps sending event invitations that are recurring and never ending. That's the ultimate power move, is you send somebody an invite and it's repeating and it never ends. That's like saying it's like staking a claim on a percentage of a human life, right? If I work 40 hours a week and you put a 30-minute meeting on my calendar every Tuesday, and you say it's only 30 minutes, it's a great chance to sync up on this or whatever, come up with all the good reasons you want. No one thinks about that other than me, apparently, that like what you have just done is you have claimed ownership of over 1% of my working life, right? Because 30 minutes would be, you only get 80 30-minute units in a 40-hour week. Who the fuck are you to say that you get over 1% of my working time, right? If you're literally my boss, then I guess you're the fucking one to say it, right? But like that still might be inadvisable. That might still be a misallocation of my time, especially when you consider that I'm going to stress about it for 20 minutes beforehand and not really start any real work for an hour beforehand, and then going to get all bent out of shape for 30 minutes after as I kind of come off of it. You know, Becky and I constantly talk about how whenever one of us is on a video call, it's like there's a 30-minute cool off period that doesn't seem to occur when we're in a physical interaction with a person. And there's kind of like a real closure. There's just sort of like awkward goodbyes. You hit end, and then you relax the muscles in your face. And then you're like, man, I hope they didn't see me do that. That it was a fake shitty smile that deep down, I'm just like dead inside and didn't want to be there. And then you got to kind of cool off and come back to reality. So it's like, even that 30 minutes is like 1% is extremely conservative. It is much more like 2 or 3%. And if more people thought that way, we'd have a way fewer recurring meetings, I suppose. But anyway, if you haven't heard it lately, please have fewer meetings. The article's really talking about like white collar workers used to create shit, and now they don't do the work, they talk about the work, which I think is a searing indictment. And when the AI connection, because every article has to have an AI connection, is maybe AI will help us out of this by making us need fewer meetings, which is a great thing to think. That's a lovely thought. But the truth is, AI is good at generating low quality creative work, which is what most of these office workers are capable of, especially if they're spending half their brain in meetings. So if anything, we're just going to have AI create the slop for us, and then we're all going to do nothing but talk about the slop. Oh, wow. That's wrong there. I guess send that through another prompting. have the computers edit that back down and steer it this way, right? I don't love this. So that's all the news that's fit to pontificate about today. Really, you know what? If there's a news item that you want me to talk about over the next, call it 4 months, and you'd be interested in my take, or you want to share your own take, that's podcast@searls.co. I may end up dragging some mailbag items, levitating them from the mailbag section into the news section through the magic of surface tension. But until then, the printing press runneth dry. So that's all we got. So if you're familiar with the typical cadence of the program, after talking about the news, we go on to, and now, in case I forget what order the things I talk about in the show are, I know that nobody likes this much meta conversation. I get it. About, like, talking about talking, sort of how, work has become talking about doing work. I'm just very excited to have buttons now and special sounds. So trust me, roll with me, give me today. Because the reason that I set all this up with the buttons is so that in the future, I don't have to talk about what section I'm in. I can just hit a button and then say, it's time for... recommendations. But the part of the show where I talk about stuff I'm watching, playing games, reading, writing, whatever. Well, not writing, consuming. This is for the content consumers among us. And I have found that I tend to consume more escapist content, sci-fi, documentaries about yesteryear, whenever U.S. politics is front and center in the news cycle. So strap in. There's more here than usual as a result. Let's start off with, I watched the final season of Star Trek Discovery. That is the Star Trek show that launched with CBS All Access, which is now known as Paramount Plus. And it was the first Star Trek series that was not going to go on the television because it was too futuristic for that. And because they knew that Star Trek fans would actually pay a monthly subscription to watch Star Trek shows. And I would say I'm an avid Star Trek completionist. Like, I watch it all and I like at least 10% of it. But I'm not a fan. I don't identify as a Star Trek person. But, I like that I've watched all the shows because it's nice to know, to have all of that canon at hand, to have that kind of like other world so fully fleshed out that for escapist reasons, it's like, it's another place that your mind can go when you're watching one of these shows. But the thing about Star Trek Discovery is it had a really troubled early production. What I think happened is that they inherited producers from the J.J. Abrams reboot who were maybe like holdovers from Bad Robot and that production company. And, the original showrunner, I don't believe was one of them, but got kicked off the show by the end of the first season. And it never really hit its stride. It's so focused on its main character that the other characters never really matter, except insofar as how they relate to that main character. But the thing that really limited that show's appeal, at least in my experience, was that there wasn't a great deal of variety in the kinds of stories that it told. And it took me several seasons to realize why. And it's because in most of episodic television, every episode is an episode. But in this new era of prestige television, every episode is a mini act at best, usually just a smattering of scenes, in an act of a movie. And so this particular series, each season is effectively one episode worth of content. And then everything that happens in between is a digression along dealing with the same themes, same characters, the same problems and pressures. And Star Trek as like a utopia where they've already solved life and there's no need for money anymore because no one is wanting. And like, whenever you see a picture of one of us at one of our houses, we all have a strange amount of land on Earth. Here's my wine villa or whatever the hell. It's suspicious. It's like, where are all the other people? Like, how are we fitting this many, you draw the line of how much population you'd expect there to be several hundred years from now. Where are the people in the tenements and the skyscraper apartments, right? Like you're gonna get a population density puzzle here if everyone gets to have their own massive vineyard. Never mind the fact that if everyone's equal and we don't have need for money anymore, like, does that mean I can just roll up to a vineyard and say, hey, I want one of those too, and you'll make more land for me or give it? Like, there's the conceit of this utopia, and they lean into it only for the purpose of clearing the table, of kind of having a blank slate for ethical dilemmas, for whatever the problem of the day is. And that was what the original series and Next Generation did very well, leaning so hard into that episodic nature that each one was kind of similar to like maybe the Twilight Zone series. Each one was an investigation of something about the human condition, or a hypothetical about life as it could be in maybe, like, for example, like an alien culture, right? That does things this way, and like what would be the knock-on effects of that, or how would we interact with it if we were to run into it? But this show is more like, all right, you gotta save the cat style 3-act movie broken up over 15 episodes. And it's got to be real dark and gloomy, and the stakes have to be monumental, save the universe level stakes, or else we're just not going to be able to milk that cat's nipples to produce enough fluid to nourish the audience for an entire season of content. And so every season has to be about how the galaxy is going to die if we don't do X. We don't save the cat. I can't even talk about the last 3 seasons because a thing occurs between seasons 2 and 3 that is a huge spoiler, and the nature of the show changes dramatically, which is maybe the most interesting thing about it. And the most interesting thing about the show is that that action, and now this is going to sound cryptic if you haven't seen it, I suppose. I realize, by the way, I'm using the phrase "I suppose" a lot today. I want to express my awareness of that fact. I will try to tone that down a little bit. The thing that made that show go completely in a different direction into where talking about seasons 3, 4, and 5 are a spoiler. Anything about what they do resolved a tension in the community that, like, when they talked about this series and the dates that it was going to fall in before it even started, people were raising, well, if you have this technologically advanced ship right as the Star Trek Enterprise comes online, like that's going to create a whole bunch of timeline and canon issues. And so the biggest cliffhanger in the series was about its production and its place in canon, and not about anything that happened on the screen. And they resolved that. And that's what it is weird when an inside thing like that is maybe the most fascinating thing about a show. But I guess maybe that's appropriate, right? If what is the point of a show now, whether it's Star Trek or Star Wars or or the new Game of Thrones reboot, right? Like, what is the purpose of the show except to feed an increasingly niche and ravenous fan base, deeper and deeper cuts, while still being acceptable enough to a wide enough group of people that ravenous fan base can still get their spouse to watch it with them after dinner or whatever. So anyway, I watched the finale. I binge watched the last season. It was acceptable gruel. It was content. It was fine. What else do I have to say about it? But, again, without venturing into spoiler land, like, it had the aesthetic of the J.J. Abrams 2009 Star Trek movie, which I love the aesthetic of. I mean, they toned down the lens flare, thank God. And it's less blue, and it's definitely more warm and dark color grading, right? It's more like a steampunk brass kind of color grading. But like the aesthetic is great. And there is a lot of suspiciously futuristic stuff for when that ship was first created and so forth. But it really sucks when a show like this struggles, because the expectations are so high because it's been 20 years since a fucking series had been created, right? With the failure of the Enterprise show, which was headed by the Quantum Leap guys, Scott Bakula, which I love that show for what it's worth. Even the cheesy song they played in the intro. So the expectations were super high. People were paying money out of pocket for it. And then they cast as the main character a terrific actress, a black woman. And then they go further and they make every single scene over 5 seasons more or less about that main character's relationship with everyone around them. Like, you can count on one hand the number of conversations that happen in seasons 1 through 4 between any 2 other people that aren't somehow moving a plot forward that's like really centered to what that main protagonist is doing. And so, of course, the fans fucking hate it. And it's really depressing. It reminds me a little bit that I don't have anything great to say about it and why you should watch it and why this is like a triumph and in this and that way, or at least find an angle that would lead me to recommend it. Unless you're a sicko like me and just likes having TV on all the time while you play video games. Like, it's great for that, but like, I don't know that I would encourage anyone to go and bother. The Strange New Worlds, which is more of like a reboot of the original series, but in a prequel form with Captain Pike. Like, that one's actually a good show because it does the episodic thing, where every week it's a new adventure. Pulls off the rare, does a musical episode, and it's actually good, which is impressive. Yeah, so it reminds me of when I walked out of the is it Paul Feig or Peter Feig, the all women Ghostbusters reboot. And that was when I was way more on Twitter. And like, whether you liked that movie or didn't like that movie, we have since invented the phrase virtue signaling as like a pejorative. But I remember tweeting that I loved the movie because I kind of like, again, with motivated reasoning, convinced myself that I liked the movie because I was looking for anything during the course of that Ghostbusters reboot movie to compliment, so that I could be on the side of the people not saying that it was terrible weeks before it came out simply because it had an all-women cast and it didn't, fill the nostalgia fantasies of people who wanted to see Bill Murray play a role that Bill Murray has said over and over he does not want to play ever again. And that really sucks, right? Because you feel like the men's rights activist assholes are somehow vindicated in the mediocrity of this content that is exceptional insofar as the people that it portrays and represents. But the thing is, like, some percentage of all content is going to be mediocre in different ways, especially when you try something new and different. And so, of course, I'm sure when it doesn't go great, everyone learns the wrong lesson and the pendulum swings back in the other fucking direction. So if you want to support representation and also potentially make the data scientists confused as why we also like mediocre content, then just go ahead and set up a computer to stream all 5 seasons of Star Trek Discovery and make the number go up. Surely at least the wonderful cast will get some residuals from that. Maybe they'll make a fraction of a penny or something. There's a Steve Martin documentary called Steve! It's in 2 parts. The 2 parts are titled Then and Now. With Then being the beginning of Steve Martin's career, focusing on his the development of his set, his stand-up set and his routine, which took years and years, but was, I wasn't there. I never saw him live, but I kind of got the vibe through having heard about it, read his biography years ago. Always had this sense that the Steve Martin's stand-up was not how other people do stand-up. Well, it was not how other people do stand-up in all sorts of places. Ways. He was the first guy to sell out a goddamn stadium as the headliner. Like, he was a phenomenon in the late 70s. He didn't have bits that he would work up into a 30-minute set, do the set, create the special that would then get put on VHS or whatever, or HBO or whatnot, and then go and tour a bunch in clubs and build up another 30 minutes, right? That's kind of how stand-up is typically nowadays. As soon as the advent of home video, right, where you could have kind of raunchy comedy. No, he just did this one set. And then as soon as he perfected it and he peaked, he was just like, I'm done. And he never did stand up again. Like, you see him live and whatnot, accepting awards and whatnot. He's great in improvisational. He did a show a couple years ago with Martin Short, and he's great. But I really respected that. And the part 2 about now is like his life now. And that's all lovely. Go watch it. It's on Apple TV Plus. It's very well made. It's interesting. But the thing that I really respected is to create something, to be best in the world, and to hit the zenith, and then to walk away and just say, even though everyone knows me for stand-up or whatever it is, I'm going to go and do something else now. You know, I'm going to go play banjo. I'm going to go make movies. I'm going to go tackle something else. Not necessarily because it's better, but because you can feel that, like, by continuing to do the thing, you've peaked. You can only go downhill from here. And I have felt that way across a few dimensions over the years, mostly in like hobbies and stuff. And once I've like, oh, you know, I've gotten as good at this as I'm going to get. So now I'm either going to just kind of slow pedal it and I'm going to go into maintenance mode, or I'm going to do something new and give that time to something else and get good at something else. And I feel like when you as a person are trying to get better at something and you don't love it, when you finally made it, that is your moment where you're like, I finally am allowing myself to feel good about this. So if you hate it, if you were doing stand-up and you hated every minute of it and it didn't feel like you, but you, for whatever reason, you were committed to do it. You're like, once I make it, once I'm Kevin Hart, oh boy, you just look out. Then you're promising yourself that your future self, once having made it, will finally be happy. And in that theoretical, if you do make it, you treat that peak as the destination. And now I'm just there. And now I finally, of course, people say this, but often fail. Once I've made it, then I'll be happy. I'll be treading water. You know, I won't need to work so hard anymore because I'll have made it. I won't need to struggle anymore because I'll have made it. I will just be there, and I will occupy a space where I matter and where I have comfort and people like me, and I'm validated. And then I will just keep on doing that stuff, I guess. Just hanging out. You know, maybe not putting my back into it, but hey, once I've made it, I don't need to. And that's sad, right? Because you get robbed when you view your life that way. You get robbed on the way up because you lose so many pieces of yourself to invest so much into something that you don't really care about or you don't really enjoy. And then you get good at it, and your body and your brain optimize around doing stuff that you don't care about and starts to discard skills and thoughts, right, about maybe whatever you did or could have. And so the uphill climb is a struggle. But then once you reach it, you're so exhausted, and you've promised yourself that for the sake of happiness, like once you reach that zenith, if you do, and most people don't, then you get to just coast. But then you're just coasting, right? And that's not a life well lived either. Then you're just kind of like, you're done. You got lots of years left. You're done. And I'm not going to name any comedians here, because this is the documentary is really about that arc, I think. And it's fascinating to see through a person who's so complex and interesting as Steve Martin. But I wish that we had more examples of prominent, well-known people who peaked, recognized that they were never going to find a higher summit to climb, and went out on top, and then did something else. And the fact that he was really good at the other thing too, and continued to be a household name and made a bunch of movies and so forth, like, fantastic. But he could have just, retreated to his cabin in the woods and chopped lumber or whatever, right? And you got Nick Offerman just making furniture, doing woodworking. So anyway, I think that's, if seeing that experience in someone is interesting to you, I would recommend the Steve documentary. Another one, Gene Wilder, called Remembering Gene Wilder. This was on Netflix. I've seen several Mel Brooks movies where Gene Wilder was present, or, at least a supporting actor. And I didn't really understand him as a man. He features most prominently in my mind these days in the form of "You Get Nothing" .gif from Willy Wonka. That is the second Willy Wonka reference in this episode. It must mean I've been talking for a while. But this one's about his life. It's called Remembering. He's not in it because he died. So it's other people talking about him. And to the extent that his voice is present, it's from his writing. And he was an avid, prolific writer. He must have journaled in addition to the book he wrote about his life and his novels and so forth. There are moments there, because you're looking at a whole vignette of a series of vignettes that make up a life. And I think that the first half might speak to some people, but I was really interested to understand his relationship with Richard Pryor a little bit better, because they had all these buddy comedies. To understand a little bit of like what that relationship was like, where they had just incredible on-screen chemistry and a productive partnership, a creative partnership that didn't necessarily extend beyond the set. Because I think that in creative work, there's almost a assumption that to get really creative with somebody, you got to be best friends. But what that validated for me was some of my genuine, the best muses that I've worked with creatively. They are really good for me creatively because they get under my skin, because there's a lot of friction when we communicate, because I've got to come up with new and interesting ways to get around the obstacles that our differences put in my way. And it can result in great work. But then after I'm done with that work, I'm exhausted, and they are the person who exhausted me. And so I don't want to be best friends with them. So I've had these collaborations with other people over the years, and maybe it was a work or whatever. And then as soon as like one of us leaves the job and then we find each other later, you have that awkward, like, you meant something to me, but you no longer mean anything to me. There's nothing that either of us can give the other right now. You can still have affection for them, I should say. But there's in my mind, the idea of like where are the boundaries in relationships is way more interesting than where's the boundary between like work and life balance, right? Like understanding that there are friends that I have where meeting one-on-one for a drink where we discuss a hard problem and one gives advice to the other. Maybe sometimes it's one way and the other way. Maybe it's always one way, like a mentorship relationship. Maybe that friendship is never gonna, hit a meaningful chord in a group setting or on a double date or something with spouses. And that is not a failure. Like, I think that like the one dimensionality that people have in mind when they think of friends as like, how close are you on a scale of 1 to 100? And like, that's your friend score. And that's what it means to be a friend. And I think that, like any analysis, I think that like a multi-factored composite score is probably more appropriate. So that made me, that I found that interesting. Apart from that, it's a lovely, there's a lot of really lovely stuff from his wife and clearly the deep love that they shared, but that's the reflection I took away from it. So yeah, that was called Remembering Gene Wilder. I'm gonna skip the next one. It's a good one. It's a good recommendation. I might save it for later. I've been wearing headphones while playing games at night because the home theater is just loud enough that Becky can hear it when she's trying to fall asleep. But my headphones are just small enough that they're cans. I'm actually wearing them now. I use them. I move them between the office and there. They're just small enough, the foam pads, that I can't fit an AirPod Pro 2 in my ear without it snagging on the pad and then hurting my ear, which results in me having like my right ear hurting, or I'm moving the cup above or below or to the right or forward or backward, and it just doesn't sit on the head right, and then it causes some strain on my head. So this discomfort, right, of having one AirPod in, because of course, in order to play a video game, you need to have an iPad on your lap watching a show. It's a normal thing, normal people stuff. While in your headphones, you're listening to the game. It's one of those things where like I'm the tech guy in the family. I do all this shit. And I realized like, yeah, like I could just download an AirPlay server for Windows. And then instead of AirPlay button from the iPad to my AirPods, I could just as well stream it to the Windows PC. And then that way I could mix the audio there and have one set of headphones comfortably on my head playing both the game audio and the video audio. And that just hadn't occurred to me in goddamn years. And I feel like such a dummy for putting up with this kind of complicated, painful headphone situation. So anyway, if you're curious, if this means anything to you, I tried all of them. The AirPlay 2 servers seem to only be interested in streaming video because that's the one that lets you do screen sharing and video sharing, which is not what I was trying to do. So the AirPlay 1 servers that only do audio, they have way worse latency because the buffering and so forth, and the latency was way worse in the original AirPlay. There is a way that you can sync the audio by measuring the latency and then delaying it on the client. But most of these servers are written by, no-name third-party companies or they're open source. And so you end up with like really bad lip syncing. So here's my recommendation. It's called Airfoil Satellite. Airfoil is a product of Rogue Amoeba, and I don't know that it's still necessary in how everything can be an AirPlay target and receiver on both sides in the Apple ecosystem. But they have this satellite app that is a free download on Android and on Windows, and it basically makes it an AirPlay 1 audio receiver. Works great. So there you go. And then, of course, as soon as I did that, I started playing another game that was so engrossing that I decided not to play a TV show while I played it. And that game was, almost feel like I need a drum roll sound effect. I have a lot of buttons here that are not being used. Maybe I'll add a drum roll. You're going to really love this. The game is Star Wars Jedi Survivor, the sequel by Respawn Interactive to Jedi Fallen Order. Jedi Fallen Order was a weird game that combined good graphics, good Star Wars-y design. It picks, a slice of the existing Star Wars timeline like all Star Wars media appears to necessarily do. Pretty good story. But they have these sort of like Dark Souls gameplay where very hard combat that you have to get good at and learn unless you're playing on story mode like me, the easy difficulty. And when you lose health, you just lose it. And to recover that health, you have to find a meditation point, which is the equivalent of like a campfire in Dark Souls. And if you choose to rest and recover that health, you pay a penalty. And the penalty is not severe, but it's the respawn. That's also the company name. All the enemies that you've killed will respawn. So if a bunch of enemies damage you and you killed them all, but then you go and rest and recover that energy, well, you just unkilled them all. So that what it does is it flattens out your health and the health of all of the enemies in the map, such that those two things are now in balance. And if you keep dying, it's because you're not good enough. Like you have to get better such that you can kill all those things and not lose so much health that you need to respawn them. Or you need to kill those things so effortlessly that when you do recover your health, the fact that they respawn is not that big of a deal. The Survivor sequel, and I slept on this because Fallen Order kind of got very samey. There's a lot of traversal that's sort of confusing. The map system, the map is cool looking, but I found the map was hard to use, and the environments are massive. And they required a ton of backtracking, like a lot of walking back through. And so each of these maps in Jedi Fallen Order, the first game, felt like a puzzle box. And especially when you're watching 5 seasons of Futurama while you're playing that game, which I was doing. That's a lie. I was watching Community. You have to keep that whole like map in your head, and you have to also keep your eyes peeled for everything around you. And you also I found myself doubting myself constantly. It was like, well, do I need to pick up this big heavy ball with the force and carry it 3 rooms over? Cause I'm probably going to need it. And then, so I found I was spending way too much time solving puzzles by searching YouTube, and that's just no way to live. That's really time consuming and annoying. So I have found, though, in the sequel, now that I've finally picked it up, it had a very buggy launch. It's like a lot of games where, like, when a game comes out, don't pre-order it. Don't play it right away. Wait until it hits Game Pass or wait till it's discounted, because no game ships finished anymore. So all these reviews were really negative because the game was broken. And look, if I'm reviewing a game and it's broken, I'm probably not going to give it 10 stars. A 10 out of 10. 5 stars. It's very important to get that straight. But now it's not broken anymore. It's actually really good. Performs great. So, at least on my PC. So it's still a traversal game, but it feels less like hard puzzles like a old school Tomb Raider or Resident Evil, and more like Uncharted. So it's like Becky, when we were playing Uncharted 2, when that first came out years and years ago on the PS3, she immediately clocked. She's like, yo, yellow stuff you can climb, because she was watching me play it. And sure enough, and I later watched a documentary to this effect, they designed it so that as a signifier of the design, like you would be able to identify climbable stuff because they'd highlight it yellow. Jedi Survivor, same thing. You can kind of see the climbable stuff It glimmers in a certain way. The first couple levels, they are indeed yellow. And that kind of climbing up here, jumping over this ledge, shimmying over here, dropping down, jumping up. It's just played out, man. Like, it is not fun. That is not gameplay. That is a interactive cinematic where no one's talking. It's all canned animations. It's not like, you're not climbing, you're following a track that is just only interesting because it's not running in a straight line. And I was hoping we were over this. I think that was one reason why Zelda Breath of the Wild was such a massive hit, was it took the same kind of formula, but then said you can just go climb whatever the fuck you want. But the thing is, you only can climb as far as you have stamina, which by constraining it with a resource, then it actually made you strategic about climbing. Or whatever feats of strength, skill, and dexterity, and so forth. So the traversal is tolerable now because it replaces a lot of extremely overcomplicated puzzle rooms. But it's still not fun. The combat, it's, if you like pew pew Star Wars shit, sure. The combat's all right. Combat's challenging if you're on hard, but I'm on story mode because I'm just here to blaze through this as fast as possible. Story is interesting. Characters are interesting. There's not a lot of... I think Andor is the only real thing that I found engaging of the recent Star Wars content. This is like almost... it's not that good. But like in video game adjusted terms, like it's closer to that than it is to, I don't know, Ahsoka or Obi-Wan, the new series. So like if you want some Star Wars content, like you could do worse. So it just feels like a mashup of other games, though. Like every gameplay element, you're like, yep, these are the puzzle rooms from Breath of the Wild. Speaking of that, lots of the little individual elements were clearly lifted from other places. This time around, Becky immediately watching me play it was saying, yo, what's up with the jumping? Because there's a double jump that you get right away. You can jump, and then in midair, you can press A, and you jump again. And you're like, you're just jumping on air. Like, that doesn't work. And I had to explain to her that in video games, the laws of physics are different. And you can totally jump and then jump again. That's just how video games work. And she wasn't buying it, and she thinks that's bullshit. And I said, but the Force. And then she rolled her eyes and reminded me that this is why she doesn't give a fuck about Star Wars. She's amenable to Star Trek, but Star Wars, I think the sequel trilogy, I think you lost Becky, Kathleen Kennedy. I think that you lost Becky. That's -1 for you. And there's no number of Inside Out 2s that you can make, Disney, that will get her back into the Star Wars bucket. You've lost her on the Marvel one too, because you did the thing, right? Where you made a bunch of series after training all of us to think that we had to watch it all to make any sense of anything. And then you released so much goddamn content that no one watched all the series. And so then a whole bunch of movies come out and we're like, well, I can't see the movie because I haven't seen the series. And so now I'm just further behind. And now it's just like you're anyway. I liked The Last Jedi, by the way. That was the only sequel movie that I liked. Come at me. This is now a highly political episode. One more. Time is running a little long here, so I'll be brief. Sunny launched this week on Apple TV, last week, with 2 episodes, with the third coming a couple days later. I think that's right. Stars Rashida Jones. This is a really interesting movie if you are a Japanophile, been to Japan a lot. It's clearly big chunks filmed on location in Japan. The Japanese actors speaking actual Japanese. That's a win right there. But there's clearly people, either writers or consultants, who are doing a really, really, really good job of. So the story, I guess, just to set it up, is Rashida Jones, her husband and son die. And then the next day, somebody from her husband's work drops off a robot and says this robot was designed kind of with you in mind, and your husband worked on it. And she's unraveling this mystery of like, how did he really die? Or what was he really working on? I know he was working on robots, that kind of thing. And there are just a few little signs, even in the pilot, where you can tell that unlike most shows that are kind of this, they use another country as just a setting, they are actually engaging with people from another culture to express the reality of when those two cultures kind of run into each other. They do it right off the bat with like how people approach mourning, you know, like, so that's a pretty serious one to start on. But even a little thing like when the coworker drops the robot off and he says in English, you know, he's kind of broken English. He says, "It's nothing. It's insignificant." Which, if you have given and received gifts in Japanese, you know, like, his brain might have been thinking, you know, you when you give a gift, you diminish it. You say, "Nanimo nai, tsumaru nai, taikutsu desu." You know, this is boring. Like, this is a nothing gift. Don't worry about it. Don't make a big deal of this, right? You're playing your gift down so that you can give it to somebody else, and you're kind of offering it up. You're elevating them by humbling yourself. So when he says it's nothing, it's insignificant, as he gives this gift in English, like, insignificant is a hard word. It probably means he looked up on a dictionary in advance of dropping this thing off for a translation. And now, granted, Japanese education is pretty good. They do a lot of reading and writing in English, so it's very possible like people just know a lot of words generally. But an experience that I've had countless times, especially for a canned interaction like this, where people will look up in a dictionary, and then there's other instances of this too, where somebody says exactly the wrong word, and I know exactly what dictionary entry in their bad Japanese English dictionaries results in everyone saying that word. Like a great example is the word graffiti. So when they look up the Japanese, this might not be true anymore, but for years and years, the leading Japanese English dictionary, when they looked up the Japanese word for graffiti in a Japanese English dictionary, the number one result is scribble. And then the number two result is graffiti. And there may be a parenthetical that scribble is a UK usage or something. But that's why when I went to Himeji Castle in 2005, there's a big fucking sign that says no scribbling. And I was like, what? And that was one of my favorite things about studying the language, especially with one of their Japanese English electronic dictionaries, because once I realized this phenomenon, I would reverse look up all of the English that was kind of baked into a culture that was like, I got a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Check out the beat while I just Denshi Jisho and revolve it. And so it's insignificant, right? Like that is a cultural touchdown that like jumped off the page at me, because that means the dude's in his car checking his dictionary to make sure he knows what to say in English when he drops this robot off, which is like, that's not about language anymore, right? It's like, it's cultural. It's like, what is going through somebody's head when they need to drop something off or when they need to make a gift. It's like, it's a level of care about the framing of the interaction that is representative of Japanese culture. Gives more of a shit about that than we do. We'd be like, here is robot. I go, you know, or we'd focus. There is a study while I was in college, University of Michigan, that I remember reading and sharing with my professor, that they studied mothers and children in a laboratory setting, and they gave them a bunch of toys. And the Western mothers would typically, they'd take the toy and they would introduce it to the child, and they would focus on explaining what it was. This is a fire truck. Or how to use it. This is an action figure and it can, shoot this projectile or whatever. And how to operate it, right? And then they'd hand it to the kid and let the kid play. And when they had Japanese mothers repeat the same experiment, they would focus almost entirely on the act of giving and receiving and like practicing social interactions and using the toy as a prop for that. Here, I'm giving it to you. And this is what it, like, here's how to look at it and appreciate it or whatever. And now you give it to me, and like the language that would be appropriate, like in an elevatory sense to a parent. And the added dimension of caring about not just the thing and how to do it, right? But the interaction as itself having meaning and weight has always been fascinating to me, right? Whereas like the language is ambiguous in certain ways where you can spell out everything you want to say declaratively if you really need to, but to do so comes across as unnecessarily curt and brusque. And it's much more artful and open-ended and kind to just, like if you see somebody and they're getting nosy and they're asking like, hey, where are you going next or something like that. And you feel that, like, you might feel pressure to go and explain yourself and say, well, I'm going here specifically over there. But like, it's much more common to give an answer that's intentionally ambiguous. So as you're not wasting the other person's brain cycles to have to follow your fucking story that they never cared about anyway. Oh, I'm going up that way a little bit. Right. All that matters to them is that you're going, right? And so that focus on the interaction, that focus on not just what this piece of matter is, not being so focused on how this noun is made up of other nouns, is really interesting. And I'm excited for this show, Sunny, because it's the first series I've seen in a long ass time that is like published by a Japanese or by an American Western studio, but seems to grok that. And that's another example of Apple TV Plus, which is where it streams, doing a great job of selecting for projects that are cross-cultural in a way that is reflective of what these cross-cultural experiences are really like, that don't cheapen that or exotify it. So anyway, Sunny, pretty cool if you want to see weird stuff and spot on English that is, real world accurate. I definitely recommend that one. Well, that brings us to the final segment and one last button to press for the first time. I'm still getting my sea legs with this thing. So I'm gonna give it one quick poke. We're gonna see the sound that it makes.
You've got mail.
Time to take a look at the mailbag. It's I haven't gotten a lot of emails lately. I'm gonna have to dig up some oldies. I know that people are still listening. Maybe I'm just doing such a good job being right all the time that no one finds any reason to write in a correction. Or maybe I'm covering topics so thoroughly that no one can think of another angle. Or maybe people are just setting the sleep timer and falling asleep to this, and there's not much of a purpose at that point. That would explain the popularity of this program in Argentina. Okay, first email. This is from April 20th. Michael writes in, I chuckle along at your jokes more than once out loud and regularly find your takes helpful. Look, man, any of you, feel free to write an email that's just that. It'll make my day. I'm zipping ahead to the questiony parts. Michael writes, what app do you listen to podcasts on and why? I'll answer that first. I use the Apple Podcast app. The reason is the Apple Watch. So most of my podcast listening is from my Apple Watch to AirPods. And a lot of that is while I'm exercising and the phone is not available. And until recently, even downloading podcast to a third-party app on the watch was really challenging and fraught. It still kind of is. And I'm not sure the world of streaming, but I can relatively reliably stream podcasts over cellular to the watch using the official Apple Podcast app. And if you've got a use case that requires you and use an app for some portion of the listening, the nature of syncing up, what you've listened to and what you haven't is such that I don't really have a choice. I'd been using Overcast previously, which I think is a really nice UI. I listened to the creator's podcast. That creator, Marco Arment, I think that he's put a lot, he's made that as good as it can be on the watch. I'm not sure if it can be as good as the Apple Podcasts app, because I'm sure that they take advantage of some sort of privileged API or means of getting enough CPU or bandwidth to download and stream stuff that third-party apps might not be able to, especially once they've been backgrounded. Next question. And on what speed generally? So I listen to podcasts at 1x normal original speed, because I used to listen at like 1.5 or even 2x, but then I would get sad because I'd run out of my podcasts faster. And I have more time apparently than I have podcasts I truly love. So I would rather listen to fewer podcasts that I really genuinely love than get through more of them and have to kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel or else run out of content, while I'm doing chores or working around the house or whatever. And dare I say now, I'm actually getting a little bit better about not always having a voice in my ears at all and just existing. I wouldn't recommend it. Michael continues, personally, I use Overcast. Oh, there we go. I tend to use their smart speed feature and also about 1.4x for most podcasts. By the way, smart speed is Marco wrote an algorithm that will detect silences and just kind of shorten them without speeding up the whole thing. But not to save time, just as I've noticed my mind seems determined to drift at 1x. That's a great question. So your mind tends to drift at 1x. That totally makes sense. If you want to stay engaged and be an active listener, speeding it up where if you don't pay attention, you might fall off the bus makes complete sense. That's how I do my conference talks. I talk fast when I'm giving a conference talk because I want to punish people or make them fear losing my train of thought. So I talk so fast that they got to stay on that bus. Here I talk slower because I'm actually perfectly comfortable with you drifting off. In fact, I'm intentionally talking in a way and about things where if your mind wanders and you're like, oh, I missed all that shit about Star Trek, it's fine. None of this matters. None of this is important. If something's really important, I'll scream and I'll get your attention. Michael! This is important. So yeah, I think that's how I use the medium. I use it to soak up time like a sponge. I use it to spend time with people and voices and ideas that I care about. And I try to have it be really low stakes as a listener and then, of course, as a creator. So thanks for writing in, Michael. Sorry that it took me an entire quarter to get to you. Neil writes in, if you dread the coming glass rectangle device singularity, he's referring to my calling out the documentary film Objectified, where Johnny Ive suggested that the pinnacle, the peak of Apple design was just going to be selling a piece of glass that's infinitely thin. If you dread the coming glass rectangle device singularity and you want to stave it off for a few more years, I recommend by getting into interchangeable lens cameras. The software will always be worse than your iPhone. They are heavy, especially once you start carrying an array of lenses. And speaking of lenses, those can get breathtakingly expensive. But a camera with a large sensor and a long lens can do things that no phone can do because of the physics of light. And you can get so fucking nerdy about them. So, Neil, thank you. That's a good point. I'd complained about convergence devices on the last version, and how I was kind of pining for the days of more bespoke, unique, purpose-built devices. That's where I was coming from. The risk of any convergence device, and the reason why I think a lot of tech nerds were resisting them at the time, as we held on to Gizmodo and Engadget and all this and those forums for dear life, was because we knew that you didn't have to be the best at everything if it's on a convergence device. Like, camera phones were not the best cameras. They were so terrible, right? Even smartphones were not the best phones. Like, their microphone and the audio quality was shit, right? They're jack of all trade devices. You are by accepting convenience, you are compromising on everything else in terms of quality. And if you care about quality, you can't resort to a convergence device. That was the thinking at the time. It's not that it was wrong. It's just gotten less right over the years. Because in many ways, like, unless you're going to spend well over $10,000, the iPhone is probably the best video camera that most people would be able to rig up at this point, when you consider the stabilization and all the other kind of stuff that you can do with it. It is the best at a lot of things now. It has become so advanced, and their market position has made it be the best at so many of the things that it does. But you're right. I could become a camera person. Every few years, I trick myself into buying a real camera. Never the interchangeable lens stuff, because it's important that I know that I'm going to come to my senses within 30 days. And so it's important that I have a straightforward return story to the store. And last one I got was the one everyone was hot about, the Ricoh, what is it, GRX Mark III or whatever, the urban version that's got like a 35 millimeter frame equivalent. And it took shitty pictures. You know why? Because even though all the hardware was fast in theory, like, the autofocus was way slower. It wasn't taking multiple exposures like the iPhone is, such that you can kind of just wave it in the air and hit the shutter and have it take a good photo. You had to really compose and you really hold steady. Like, or you had to set that focus very manually. Like, and it's just too fiddly. You can get great JPEGs off that device if you take your time and if you think hard about it. But like, the thing that's been lost as well is, over the last 10 years, like, I've lost patience with thinking about making a good photo. I'd rather capture experiences, and more of them, with mediocre photos. But like the phone, what the camera team at Apple's goal is make it impossible to take a bad photo, is effectively their marching order. And you can see it in so many ways that the app is designed, that like, it is fighting you if you try to make a bad photo. And stuff like the night mode keeps turning itself back on, or the macro lens thing keeps turning itself back on, or it makes it hard to turn the flash on for good, right? Like, the number of exposures it's taking constantly, like, it's getting better and better about merging those together and picking the best of the ones available. And I'm sure that we're going to see some amount of AI shit with the new iPhone 16 Pro, where it's going to blend exposures maybe, so everyone's smiling and no one's blinking. I don't know. I actually kind of already does that. Yeah. You are correct, Neil, but you're not going to get me this time. No, sir. Will, he wrote in with 5 questions, and I've only answered one of them, so I'm going to pick another one from his list of 5 quick hits. Ooh, question 4. Would you be up for sharing your repo for the work that you've been doing for Becky? Man, that's a great question. It's closed source. It is a commercial application. We are going to sell subscriptions to it. But really, it's selling to, you're buying the content. really. Like there is app-like functionality. There is going to be some amount of, utility to it as an application for sure. I had an interest. There was another consultancy. I don't know what they're up to. Down in Dayton, Ohio. We were in Columbus. Friends of ours, great people. And they, like me, would open source everything that they did by default, just out of habit. My website and my blog at the time were open sourced. And then they found that their website, which was open sourced, got just sort of copied by some content farm and then posted first as a painting company. So like some designer out there had taken it and made, probably sold a design contract. And so it was like their website as a consultancy, a design agency. And you go and you find like another, like a painting company, like a home painter. It's the exact same website. So this just ripped off the design, right? And that wouldn't be so bad until you think about it and you're like, oh, like somebody could just sell this as like a theme now, right? So now it's like my website, which is, there's branding value in that. Like this is going to be used by all these people in this very cookie cutter way. It's not going to look particularly good. And so they closed sourced the site after that. And I closed sourced our site at Test Double after that because I didn't want to take the risk that that's not somebody trying to do you harm, right? Like somebody could just deface it and post it up and like as a parody almost, like, make fun of you or say, this is why you suck, So that's too risky. For an application like this, though, there's so much value in the code itself. Like if I could share all of it, like it could solve problems for people for sure. Or they could self-host the application, right? And that could have value. But the thing that I've learned is most people, if you give them a large code base that does 20 things, they will not or cannot take the time to go in and pick out the one out of the 20 things that they actually need or want to learn from and detangle it from its connection to the other 18 things or 19 things and get value that way. Like I've got my website is a better example. It's got all these syndication endpoints. It's got all of this stuff that's going on that in isolation doesn't make sense. But when you consider that I've got these Docker containers that are like syndicating it to these different platforms, it's like, oh, that's what that feed is for. And that's why this template is this way. And so people have asked me to open source it and I could, but then the amount of documentation that I would need to have anyone make any sense of it and be able to use it would be massive. And if and you could say, well, you just open source and don't document it. Well, then what happens is either no one sees it and no one uses it, at which point, like, what was the point? Or worst case, people actually try to fucking use it. There's no documentation to answer their questions. And then they just email me or open an issue. And then I wait 24 hours and see if they fix their own problem, like I said. But then I've got the open source maintenance burden of a thing that's like, it's not, if I was designing open source, here's what I would do. I would do a focus, single purpose thing with a limited API and not a lot of options, not a lot of configurability, and probably some tests. And that's now my, if you look at any of the repos I made in the last 10 years, that's what kind of things I share in open source, because I've been burned by doing unfocused, wildly configurable libraries that plug in framework A and framework B. And so those are both moving targets or have a lot of dependencies, and every configuration option that's now it's a combinatorial explosion of every single factor that you have to test for that could introduce bugs. If there's not enough testing, then it's going to result in somebody sends a pull request and there's no way to assert that it works without pulling the code down and playing with it. If you don't have those, if your open source doesn't have those qualities that I just mentioned, you're going to have a real fucking bad time as a maintainer if you're unfortunate enough for people to use your open source. And so I think for me, as somebody who values his time or is learning to, I would not open source something if it was just going to make me miserable, because there's no such thing as giving something away for free when you're giving something like code without it coming back to having these like downstream costs of people needing help or people wanting to improve, even people wanting to improve it. Hey, I made this better. Hey, I made it 3 times faster. Hey, because then you got to review it and you got to make sure it's safe. And my first big project that got a lot of followers, this is in 2010, got a lot of users. I just sort of blindly hit accept and merge on everything. And boy, was that dumb. That was super dumb because then I didn't even understand the thing. And somebody would come in with, oh, well, this makes it 5 times faster. Well, that sounds great. And I'd look at it. Oh, all right, cool. And merge, cut a release. Hey, everything's broken for me in this weird set of factors. Like, oh, well, all right. Oh, look, it has to do with that part of the code that just got slammed in. And I don't understand it. And now I've got 2 problems, right? So open sourcing something that's like a full app that's not meant to be self-hosted, like the product isn't the self-hosting of the thing. I would just be giving people pain because it would give them the promise that they could just have this and get up and running, but not with the follow through of showing them how or being there for them when it didn't work just right. And only I have the context to understand everything that's been there because I was the one who built it. But I have the time to build it, barely, but I don't have the time to document it and also do the other things that I have to do. So, William, that was a wonderful question. I really appreciate it. And I think that's a good heuristic for deciding whether or not you should open source something or not, because it's not about other people. It's about you at the end of the day, and your time and what you get out of open sourcing something. So anyway, that'll be it. Thus concludes version 16. We laughed. We came, we saw, we laughed, we conquered. There's verbs. And apparently I'm all out of words. I'm fresh out of things to say. And that's how I know it's time to hit one last button. Goodbye.